in the neighborhood of $1 trillion. And most of us, I think, on the Republican side have been troubled since day one about government intervention into the private markets. One of our concerns has been that we're taking capital that could be used by more efficient, more successful companies and enterprises with better business models, and we're shifting that money to companies that are less efficient and whose business models need changing. And by putting capital into those companies, we almost enable them or allow them not to confront some of the inefficiencies in their own enterprises. Let me close by saying this. There's been a lot of discussion about the greatest economic challenge since the Great Depression. One thing that I've tried to do is go back and look at the 9 or 10 recessions we've had since World War II. What at least I find, and you may tell me that I'm wrong, is that the GDP in all but the last 2 of those recessions dipped by as much as 5% in at least one quarter. In this quarter, which many people are saying is the worst quarter, we expect maybe a 4% dip in GDP. So at least when you look at the history of the recessions since the World War II, you find that this recession may in fact not be any greater, at least now. I don't know if it's something that we in the future, but at least right now, this recession, as far as a loss of GDP, is no greater than at least 8 of our 10 recessions since World War II. So the question that I would ask, and I'll close with this, is if we are in a recession that is, at least from a GDP standpoint, is no greater than 8 of the last 10, why are we in this recession having so much government intervention? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes. We're under the rule for cabinet officials of 2 5s and 2 3s. The gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you. I welcome our distinguished guest, and thank you for your leadership. I particularly would like to commend Chairman Baer for her leadership in foreclosure prevention, and particularly for developing a new loan modification guarantee program to refinance on a large scale, which would help us to save millions of people, to help them to stay in their homes. And I'd like to be associated with the comments of both the ranking member and the chairman that our intention was to use some of the TARP monies to invest in our economy and to get it moving in the right direction, and certainly stabilizing housing, as Chairman Bernake has said repeatedly, that we must fix the housing crisis before we can get the economy back on track. So whatever the model, I firmly support using TARP money to stabilize housing in our economy. Secondly, my constituents are telling me that many of them still cannot get access to credit. Given that bank lending is still basically shut down, we need to be asking whether and when we should expect at least some fraction of TARP funds injected into banks to be lent. After all, one of the primary purposes of the TARP program was to get credit moving. I have non-bank lenders who are my constituents who lend money to small businesses and want access to the TARP to increase that activity. Today's Wall Street Journal talks about insurance companies that are buying up banks just to get access to the TARP money. And we then read many articles that banks are using TARP monies for buying other banks. So we are basically funding mergers and acquisitions, not lending. So my basic question is, why shouldn't we be giving TARP money out based on the activity it funds? Why don't we fund organizations that will lend it, whether it is a bank, an insurance company, so that we will be getting the credit out into the communities, which was the purpose of the TARP program. Again, every article talks about how it's being used for capital formation, mergers, acquisitions, other activities, buying up swaps, buying other things instead of getting the credit out into the communities. So there are many questions before us today, but those are two of my prime focuses, that we should be helping people stay in their homes, and we should be working harder to get credit out into the communities. Thank you.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and it's certainly better late than never. It appears that 80% of the funds that are currently available under the TARP program have already been committed. So I'm glad we're at least holding the hearing today. The Washington Post reported last week, quote, "No formal action has been taken to fill the independent oversight post established by Congress when it approved the bailout to prevent corruption and government waste." So I believe there is sufficient work for this committee at this time. As many in this room know, I did not support the original Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. Clearly, as most, I recognize that we do have a legitimate crisis as opposed to those that occasionally get manufactured around here. I embraced an idea I thought I would never embrace, and that was a government-insured model for mortgage-backed securities. I also preferred a secured loan model. My ideas and those of other conservatives did not carry the day. This is the law of the land. We want to make sure that it works. I had many reservations about the toxic asset purchase model, not the least of which was my belief that the federal government ultimately was not institutionally competent to purchase the right assets at the right price, much less manage them in a proper fiduciary fashion. But I recall being told at the time that this model had been studied at Treasury for a number of months and that the other alternatives for a number of reasons were discounted. On October 3rd, when the law was passed, the Dow closed at 10,325. Yesterday it closed at 8,273. To the best of my knowledge, any data that has come across my desk shows that consumer confidence remains low, so clearly we have a ways to go. I will be curious in this hearing to understand the reasons why the toxic asset purchase model has apparently been abandoned. If that is true, I, for one, applaud it, and always thought the direct equity infusion model would be a preferred model, although I prefer debt as opposed to equity. I fear that, though, that some view it as a bait and switch, and I am curious to what extent regulatory and programmatic uncertainty are exacerbating the economic woes that we face today, as people wait to see what portion of the money they may be able to apply for. I hope going forward that, number one, we measure the program by is it working? Number two, $700 billion is a lot of money. I haven't found anybody who doesn't want a piece of it as of yet. I hope that we look upon the program as something, the recipients will be chosen by how it could impact our macroeconomy and not a political-driven process picking winners and losers. And last but not least, taxpayer accountability and transparency must be paramount. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Secretary, let me explain to members, we have, I believe, until noon. We will obviously not be able to accommodate all the members. I am going to hold very strictly the time limits for all of us. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Congressman Backus, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. 6 weeks ago, Congress took the critically important step of providing important authorities and resources to stabilize our financial system. Until that time, we faced a financial crisis without the proper tools. With these tools in hand, we took decisive action to prevent the collapse of our financial system. We have not, in our lifetime, dealt with a financial crisis of this severity and unpredictability. We have seen the failures, or the equivalent of failures, of Bear Stearns, IndyMac, Lehman Brothers, Washington Mutual, Wachovia, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and AIG, institutions with a collective $4.7 trillion in assets when this year began. By September, the financial system had seized up presenting a system-wide